It looks like we are live. I'm getting a notification that we're live. So we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're streaming right now. For all of you who are on Facebook and YouTube, welcome. For all of you who are here with us on the Zoom meeting, again, welcome. We're happy to see all of you. We're speaking this week on a very important subject as it's very pertinent to what the United States has just gone through. The United States has gone through an election process, and a natural question for a lot of people who live in a democracy and they are exposed to the Baha'i faith is, what is the Baha'i perspective on democracy? And our topic today is crisis in democracy, the challenges we face today and how it can be remedied. Mr. Kamran Hakim is our speaker today. He has been married for 40 years. He has 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son, and 4 grandchildren. He currently lives in Northborough, Massachusetts. Kamran Hakim and his wife are members of the Worcester Baha'i community. Mr. Hakim was born into a Baha'i family, and his religious ancestry is from Jewish descent on his father's side and Muslim descent on his mother's side. And Mr. Hakim does not consider himself to be a Baha'i by birth. Mr. Hakim declared himself a Baha'i through his own investigation after he moved into the United States in 1976 for continuing his education. Being away from his family provided Mr. Hakim the opportunity to examine his beliefs. Mr. Hakim explored the Baha'i faith along with other religions and ideologies before he chose the Baha'i faith as his spiritual path. Mr. Hakim has a master's degree in material science and engineering from State University of New York at Stony Brook, Long Island, New York. Mr. Hakim is a device systems engineer by profession. Over the past 4 decades, philosophical writings and scriptures of various religions have continued to attract Mr. Hakim's attention. He has continued to explore them both as his hobby. Given his professional background, naturally, Mr. Hakim likes to look at religion and philosophy from an engineering perspective. Some have characterized this approach as the more comprehensive epistemological perspective. Epistemological is stemming from epistemology, which is, again, the questioning of why do you know what you know? How do you know what you know? Really, how do you know what you know? Mr. Hakim's presentation should, therefore, be considered in this light. Mr. Hakim was very active in various USENET news groups from 1982 to 1992, then to a lesser extent from 1993 until 1998, through private communication with various people throughout the world. Mr. Hakim has worked on deep diving into the Baha'i writings with several groups of youth between ages 13 and 18 over the past 2 decades. And that has really come into to benefit everyone who listens, because he is able to speak in a way that we all understand in all ages, irrespective of where we're coming from. That being said, I wanted to thank you again, Kamran, for joining us today. We're very appreciative. We are right now, it's Sunday, November 13. It's 11:04. We welcome you for your beautiful presentation. And for everyone who's joining today, this presentation, we want to get through it. So we're going to ask for today that we have your questions until the end, unless Mr. Hakim asks for questions during the presentation. Thank you very much.
Aloha, Paul. Hello, everyone. And thank you very much for such an introduction. I'm not sure if I deserve 75% of those, except the fact that I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren and 1 wife. In any case, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be with you and to speak with you in regards to the concept of democracy. As it was mentioned, this is a very important topic in today's world, and it really deserves a level of scrutiny on the part of all citizens in order to have a better understanding of what it is that we're dealing with and what are the expectations that they have from us. So today I'm going to be covering a number of areas. First, I'm going to describe to you what my expectations are of this presentation. We are going to also do an introduction on the Greek contribution to civilization, the modern approach to democracy, also the framework of the operation of democracy, and we're going to make some observations about that. The judgment of the Greek philosophers regarding direct democracy, the human impact on modern democracy, and I am going to propose 2 tweaks to the democracy for becoming more functional. And also, since I'm going to be raising some questions, I'm going to provide also some answers to the questions that I have raised. And I will complete this presentation by Abdul Baha's desire for the American democracy. So regarding the nature of this presentation, basically, given the fact that we all live in the United States, or a great majority of us live in the United States, I have chosen the American democracy as a system that I would like to use in order to deliver the message that I would like to give here. Nothing in this presentation is meant to be a political statement. If you walk away from this presentation and you think that you have seen a political statement of some sort, or I have made a political statement, that is, I consider that a misunderstanding, because that is definitely not my view. I am approaching this topic from a philosophical point of view. No statement in this presentation is to be taken as supporting or siding with political parties, alluding to any specific political figures of our time. This is an attempt to explore human behavior and its impact on political democracy, as well as the concept of democracy itself. And my expectations are as follows. Hopefully, I'm not going to be boring you. My purpose is definitely not teaching you. My hope is for you to, at the end of this presentation, to ask, why did he say that? And why did he mean by what he said? So basically, democracy is a Greek contribution to human civilization. It consists of 2 words, etymologically, demos and kratos, which is the rule of the people. The Athenian democracy was basically introduced 507 BC by Callisthenes. So it's approximately 2,500 years ago. This model is commonly referred to as direct democracy. And basically, each year, they chose about 500 people who participated in that democracy in Athens. Those citizens had to actively participate and serving the governments. They controlled the political process, and they were responsible for making the new laws. And later on, as these laws were developed, it was up to the citizens of Athens to ratify the law, To vote, citizens had to attend an assembly on the day of the vote that the vote took place, basically. So basically, if we look at the concept of direct democracy, public voting basically resulted in the creation of laws. Athenian democracy actually lasted for about 200 years. And it formed the foundation of the representative democracy that we enjoy throughout the world today. So the modern approach to democracy, it's called the representative form of democracy, and it basically adds an extra step to the recipe that I provided in the last page. So basically, people participate in the process of voting, that there is an extra step where we choose representatives, and these representatives are going to create the laws. And by doing that, we are basically taking the public away from ratifying the laws that have been established. Citizens do not vote for the laws, they just simply elect their representatives. And they are the ones who are going to debate and sign into law that which they have agreed upon. Citizens basically trust the elected reps to carry their will. Citizens are asked to get involved and vote. Citizens are free to choose and basically vote without coercion or intimidation. And the elected reps stay in their position until the time of re-election, and depending on which level of government we are dealing with, the amount of time that you're going to be staying in the office varies. Through these elected representatives, basically, if we look at the original premises associated with democracy, we will find out that the forefathers, one of the reasons that they went into representative democracy was that individuals are going to have a better chance of being heard, and they are not going to be directly subjected to the majority who might have some extreme views. So it was meant to be some type of a mechanism that normalized this entire process. So the implication of that is, while the reps are elected by the majority, actually they are meant to represent the entire population from whom they came from. And also, in a representative democracy, is a mechanism for regulating the tyranny of the majority. This is a terminology that is used in the philosophical writings and the writings of the political machinery of the time when the government of the United States was established. And also, you find references to that in the writings of Plato's in his Republic. Those who are also another factor in representative democracy is that those who are running for election, they are allowed to campaign, and this involves speech making, tours, debates, advertising, phone calls, and the use of social media. So there is a framework associated with democracy, and I am going to be making some observations about that. The reason that I'm doing this here is that if you listen to all the conversation that is taking place about democracy, you will find that people have made observations that as the community, as we operate in a smaller communities, so for example, the rural areas in any state, let's take Maine, for example. If you go to a village or a rural area, you find that democracy is at its best. And as we move towards larger social contexts, to larger cities and to larger governments, there is somehow or the other less of a representation that is taking place, and there is a separation that takes place. So I would like to make some observations about this, and I'm going to move through that quickly, but please pay attention to what I have highlighted in a different color here. So in rural area, democracy is most obvious, basically. And in a sense, we can say that there is a degree of similarity among people. People know each other, and they can relate to each other at a far greater level. When we move to larger cities, relative to the most obvious, then there is a degradation of that obviousness. So democracy become more obvious rather than most obvious. And the reason for that is because there are those social and cultural attributes that are going to become somewhat diluted, and people are not going to be as close to each other, and there is some more variability in there. And then I take it to the state level, and as you see, this degree of sameness is going to become less. At the country level, basically, it gets even less than that. And when we get to the international level, we end up with clash of social and cultural norms. They become the most prominent. And this is one of the reasons that when we attempt to bring the different peoples of the world together, then language becomes a barrier, religion becomes a barrier, color becomes a barrier, ethnicity becomes a barrier. So it is much harder for people to be able to find the sameness that we are looking for. So this common factor among all these cases that I have described above, in mathematics, they refer to that as a degree of freedom. And degree of freedom is basically, these are independent variables that you can change without having any impact on the other variables. So for example, if you look at, and I'm applying that to a social context. So basically, if you look at variabilities or the degrees of freedom in a society, you can have one degree of freedom could be race, another degree of freedom could be belonging to a particular political party, another degree of freedom could be religion, language, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. You name it, you call it. You've got all sorts of variabilities in there. I've placed two examples here. The one on the left looks at the racial diversity in each state, and it gives you the relative percentages. So it describes, it's a measure of the amount of sameness that people feel when you go into that state, if they are going to look at each other. The one on the right is basically looks at religion and religious affiliation. And you see, again, there is a degree of diversity as we go throughout the United States. Once again, I am using these two because I'm using them as an archetypical examples of these degrees of freedom that I talked about. And each different degree of freedom could basically cause an erosion in the level of sameness that I talked about in the previous slide. So as you go from a smaller community where everyone comes from a farming background, they have a similar history, they have gone to the same church, and they are from the same color. As a result, they feel more comfortable in interacting with one another. All of those are going to become less and less and less as you go from a very small village to a big city, to a state, to the country, and to the world at large. Now, what we just discussed in the previous pages in regards to the Athenian democracy, which was a direct form of democracy, compared to the US democracy, which is a representative democracy, you can see that there are certain areas where there is similarity, and there are certain areas that are different. For example, the idea of citizenship. Please note that they were talking about male. If we go to the history of the United States, we find a very similar thing, which I will discuss later on, who was considered to be a citizen. Laws voted directly by the citizens, in this case, by the elected representatives, and so on and so forth. And as you can see, we have a legislative, executive, and the judicial that was a similar set of characteristics between the two systems. However, you can see the differences, in these two areas. So I'm going to go a little bit more into the detail between the differences between the Greek and the American form of democracy. Once again, Greek system was a direct form of democracy. This is an indirect form of democracy, or representative democracy. And nearly all modern democracies are representative democracies. All adult citizens in Greek were required to take an active part in the government. And in this case, we have the elected persons who are going to be participating in that process. Among the Greeks, only free men were considered to be the citizens of Athens and had the right to vote. The slaves, women, children were not considered citizens. And actually 50 years afterward, women became citizens, but not in the very beginning. So basically in 451, Herculean law formally recognized the Athenian-born women as citizens, and citizenship was conferred on the children who were born from them. Now let's compare that to the United States. In the very beginning, in the United States, only free men had the right to vote. And the Declaration of Independence took place in 1776. Slaves obtained the right to vote 94 years later in 1870. And women obtained the right to vote in 1920s. And basically, since then, all adults are considered to be US citizens and vote. In today's democracy, all must register to vote. Around the Athenian times, that was not really a requirement to register like that. So if a citizen did not fulfill his duty at the time of the Athenian democracy, basically they fined him and they painted him red because he did not fulfill his responsibility. In the case of American democracy, thanks God, nobody is going to come and put red paint on us, but there are no punitive consequences, so it is up to us whether we want to vote or not. What was the judgment of the Greek philosophers regarding the direct democracy? It was not very nice. Socrates was one of the most vocal critics of the direct democracy, and basically for this very reason, he was put to death, because they told him that he is corrupting the youth of Athens and he is practicing impiety. So in essence, he was killed because he was a philosopher. As a philosopher, he used to teach. And when he said something that people didn't like, as a result, they put him on trial. And in one day, without any lawyer or anybody else, they basically put him to death and made him to drink from the poison cup. Socrates' death became the testimony of the failures and the disadvantages of democracy, basically. Plato and Aristotle both criticized the shortcomings of democracy. Aristotle basically cites 3 forms of government, which he considers to be the best. And he said that these governments, they have basically a date after which they are going to go bad. So he said monarchy, after a while, it's going to go into tyranny. Aristocracy is going to go into oligarchy. And basically constitutional republic, if it goes bad, it's going to turn into democracy. He viewed democracy to be the chaotic rule of the masses in the direct form of democracy. We are not talking about representative democracy here. This is a direct form of democracy. However, there are two notes that I would like to mention here. Note number one, basically remember that the prescription for the perversion of the democracy is related to the direct democracy. So we are not sitting here to say that American democracy is basically is a democracy because the constitutional republic of the United States has been basically gone bad. And number two, per Aristotelian prescription, America is basically a constitutional republic, not a democracy. And if you go and read two documents that goes back to the beginnings of the United States, you will find that the forefathers of the United States, they refused to use the term democracy. That terminology has not been used. So basically, it is referred to as the government of the, most of the time, they are talking about the rule of the people by the people, which is an implication of democracy, but nevertheless, they did not use the term democracy because of the negative implications that were associated with this terminology. However, these days, it has become very acceptable to use the term democracy referring to the government of the United States. So what is the human impact on modern democracy? Now, before I get into that, I just wanted to make sure that I am going to use a quotation from Abdul Baha here. And I would like to have you pay attention to what he says. He says, every excellent thing, peerless though it may be, it can still be diverted to wrong ends. A lighted lamp in the hands of an ignorant child or of the blind will not dispel the surrounding darkness nor light up the house. It will set both the bearer and the house on fire. Can we in such an instance blame the lamp? No, by the Lord God, to the seeing, the lamp is a guide and will show him his path. What is a disaster to the blind? One question, this is not meant to be a criticism of the democracy. I am making a judgment on the people who are participating in the democracy. There is a question that we need to ask for ourselves, that if democracy is the lamp that we are carrying with us into the 21st century and into the 22nd century, are we carrying it as a person with a seeing eye, or are we being blind or being childish in regards to the way that we are treating democracy? So I am making a judgment based on the quotation that I've used from Abdul Baha regarding that. And I think it is a reasonable thing to do from a philosophical point, and I will get to that later on. So let us explore some questions here. What factors inspire the citizens to participate in the election process? Are citizens truly free to vote without coercion and intimidation? As you remember, this was a requirement for the representative democracy. The landscape of democracy today is covered with the landmines of infomercials. How do we obtain the knowledge in order to be able to make our choice, to make the right choice? I am going to bring up a very funny topic here. So if those are running in the democratic process are not really good choices, is none of the above going to receive the majority votes and be elected? Which means that, are we going to restart the election and hopefully have other people running? There are many examples where people basically had to settle down for one out of the two. And when they go and ask them, why did you choose this person? He said, well, didn't have any choices, and I felt that this was the lesser of the two evils. And by the lesser of the two evils, please take that as I'm not suggesting that the people who are running are evils. It is the terminology that is used, and it is just a verbiage. So is the population being educated how to be a worthy citizen and how to be worthy elected officials? What is the one true purpose in becoming an elected representative? Do the people elect represent everyone, or just those who elected them? So are we really fulfilling one of the goals that the forefathers of this country had established in order to dampen the tyranny of the majority? How firm is the degree of citizens' trust in the elected reps? What inspires an elected rep to honor the trust of the electorate? These are questions for consideration. At this point, while you're thinking about this, what I would like to do is I would like to switch gear and move towards the concept of democracy as a theory. So have the faults of the democracy been eliminated in its modern representative form? Don't forget, there were certain faults associated with direct democracy, and we attempted to change that to representative democracy in order to make sure that it's going to function properly. So since right in the beginning, they said that I am an engineer, I would like to recommend as an engineer that we need to do some fundamental tweaks to the assumption of democracy in order to make it more functional. Now, I have got two reasons for that. Number one, engineers are very nosy people, and they try to figure out how things work. And number two, I work in the field of reliability. You work in reliability, your purpose is to break things and to make sure that what has been designed is going to be able to function properly, regardless of the amount of stress that is going to be imposed on it. So I'm going to be looking at this from that point of view. I am not suggesting by any means that I'm a political scientist. I'm a learned in the field. I am just a nosy engineer who is attempting to look at this from the perspective of an engineer. So tweak number one, we are dealing with Plato's model. Plato had a model. It is called the allegory of the chariot. Basically, there is a charioteer, and then there is a white winged horse and a black winged horse. And the charioteer has to control both of those in order for the chariot to move. So basically, a human being has a tripartite characteristic. So that which makes up a human being is mind, soul, and the spirit. The idea comes from in Plato's Republic, and it reverberates into religious writings of Christianity, Islam, as well as Baha'i faith. You find quite a bit of references to that in the Baha'i writings as well. So basically, as you can see here, the charioteer is the only entity who is mindful. Both the white color horse as well as the dark color horse, both of them are considered to be mindless. Both of them are running on emotion or the base characteristics of the soul. So it is up to the mind or the charioteer to control them. This allegory emphasizes superiority of reason, and the soul is most free when it functions in line with the dictates of the reason. This allegory can no longer represent the human behavior. And I am going to offer you two reasons for that. We really need a new model because of two reasons. So I am going to go through reason number one and then explain reason number two, which I did not put on the foils here. Reason number one is that reason is not a suitable criterion for judgment by itself. So according to Plato, reason rules by looking out for the good of the soul as a whole. In simple terms, my reason guards my interest, as your reason is going to guard yours, and his and her reasons, or reason, sense of reason, is going to guard theirs. Now imagine, now you have a world full of people who have their reason is going to be guarding what needs to be happening. If you have 2 billion people, each one have their own opinion in regards to what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is bad, then God help us all, because we are going to have a tough time making a decision in regards to what direction we should be going. Reason is quite valuable. It turns out that reason is quite valuable at a personal level, but it is a questionable one at a collective level or a societal level. I am going to make a distinction between two concepts. If you go out on the street and ask average Joe, is there a reason between good and bad and right and wrong? 99.9% of the people are going to tell you they are synonyms. There is no difference between them. I am going to say, no, that is not the case. They are very different. And the difference between the two is going to become apparent in the way that we are dealing with life. So good and bad is a rational standard based on the reason, the judgment of the mind of an individual. Since I am the center of the universe in my own life, what is good for me might be bad for someone else. Good and bad is a function of time. What is good today might not be good tomorrow. So I buy a bunch of stocks today, and by the end of the day, the price of the stock goes up and there is enough gain in there. That is good for me. I'm going to sell the stock and make a bunch of money. However, if I wait until tomorrow, bad news is going to come in and the stock is going to drop 20%. So if I sell my stock tomorrow, it's bad. So something is good today is bad tomorrow. There are many other examples. I thought people can relate to stocks, so I think that suffices about the point I'm attempting to make. What about right and wrong? Right and wrong is not a rational standard. It's a spiritual standard. It's based on a point of reference which is outside of the mind of an individual. It's a criterion of judgment that resides elsewhere. So it cannot be selfish. It cannot be self-centered. So I am going to quote from you a quotation from Baha'u'llah. He says that this is the infallible balance which the hand of God is holding. He's referring to himself. And he is basically establishing himself as the criteria of judgment for those who choose to believe in him, to use the standard that he establishes for making a judgment at a societal level. Now you see we have got two tools. We have got a criteria by which we can judge between good and bad based on our mental criteria, based on our intelligence, based on rationality. And now we have another criteria by which we establish the concept of right and wrong based on that which someone else is saying. For Muslims, it was Prophet Muhammad who said that. For Christians, it was Jesus Christ who said that. For Jews, it was what Moses revealed. For Hindus, it was what Krishna said. And for Zoroastrians, it was what Zoroaster said. For Baha'is, it is what Baha'u'llah says. Now, a scientist might come along and say, what are we doing here? Why do we need this a standard of judgment in order to be able to move forward? I think what I'm going to say is that if you look at physics, you will find ample amount of examples where in order for a particular formula to work, we need certain constants. For example, absolute temperature, the speed of light, Planck's constant. These are factors that in order for scientific knowledge and the formulations to work, you need a standard or fixed point of reference in order for anything else that you're calculating to make sense. In the society and in the realm of human interaction, we need a constant, and that constant comes from the person of the manifestation of God. For today, we believe that is Baha'u'llah. 14 centuries ago, it was Prophet Muhammad. 2,000 years ago, it was Jesus Christ. And 1,000 years from now, it is going to be somebody else who is going to come and bring that fixed standard according to which we can make a judgment, a spiritual judgment between what is right and wrong. Plato's model operates based on the assumption that good and bad is equal, right and wrong. Is that correct? In the past, probably it was. In the future, as we move into the future, it is not. And we will get to why it is not when I represent the new replacement model. So while this assumption is correct at the personal level, it breaks down at the collective level. The charioteer of the reason has its own interest and is bound to be mistaken in his decision, which influences others. Reason by itself does not provide a balanced judgment. So before I move from this page, this was one reason that I gave you. Another reason that I'm going to be giving you is the fact that in this particular model that was advanced by Plato, basically it applied to a situation where the great majority of people were uneducated. So it is the charioteer of reason or the learned was necessary in order to direct the masses. This is why that if you go to the church, you have the church leader, the father, who is the charioteer, who is going to be basically directing the masses to go in a particular direction. If you are a Democrat, it is the Democrats manifesto, Democratic Party manifesto, that is going to be the charioteer for the person, for all the Democrats to go according to. If it is a Republicans, it is the Republican manifesto which is going to control that, and so on and so forth. However, please be advised that once I made a statement that this was a valid model that applied to the case where great majority of people were uneducated. However, when people are educated, they are no longer horses that a charioteer, who is a religious leader or a particular Marx ideology, for example, who is dictating what the Communist Manifesto is supposed to be, or X, Y, and Z, to tell them what to do. Actually, it is quite offensive to the members of the society that they are being labeled as stupid. Excuse my language here, because a horse compared to the charioteer is a stupid part of the whole model. So as we move forward, it is necessary for us to be able to think about this and to see where this model is breaking down. And this brings us to the next model, which is what Baha'u'llah has proposed. He comes up with the allegory of the bird. And like the Platonic model, we are using a tripartite model where the spirit, mind, and soul are still at work. However, Abdu'l-Baha describes, and he says that this pure essence is the same entity. If it manifests itself as a thinker, it is called the mind. If it is the control of the body, it is referred to as the soul. And if it basically reacts to that which the manifestation of God for the age is telling the individual, then it becomes the spirit. And it drives the individual as a spiritual person. So how does that come into being in the model that Baha'u'llah is presenting? So the soul becomes the body of the bird, and the mind and the spirit basically become the engine to make this bird fly. Please note that in order for this flight to take place, there has to be a balance between the rational and the spiritual. If it is not, the bird cannot fly. So the decision that needs to be made has to be a decision that is going to be an amalgamation of the mental process and the spiritual process, the rational process and the spiritual process. And then and only then, we will have the birth of humanity, either as an individual or at the societal level, to be able to take its flight, making the correct decisions that are necessary in order to move forward. So there are some points of similarities and differentiation between these two models. In both cases, there are dual motive forces. Basically, you've got two winged horses for the chariot, the model of the chariot. Dual motive forces are the two wings. We have both models are plural. They have three different components. However, in the case of the bird, the three components are aspects of the same entity. That's why Abdullah says the pure essence. He starts his description with a pure essence, because he says, yes, it is one entity, it has three aspects. When you go to the Platonic model, soul is different from the spirit, it's different from the mind. That's why it's tripartite, and each one of them is separate. There are two motive forces, and both of them are basically emotional, because the base nature of a human being, as the philosopher described by the soul, is an emotional reaction to that which the body wants. As a result, the body does what the body wants. And the spirit, the spiritedness of a person, is also an emotional aspect of the behavior. So basically, the charioteer is dealing with two emotional horses there. In the case of the bird, the control is based on the rational and the spiritual factors and the pure essence can only fly if the two work together in unison. Appetites of the soul affected as a motive force. The various factors that affecting the soul are the weight, attachment, lack of balance between the two wings, and so on and so forth. These are just examples that I have given. It's not a full set of reasons. This new replacement model allows an individual to make rational, good and bad decision through mental faculty when necessary, and a spiritual right and wrong decision through the spiritual faculty when required. This was not accommodated in Plato's rationalistic model. Unfortunately, 150 years has passed, and not a single philosopher or leader of thought has basically come and taken a look at this model. You know, if you look at the world of philosophy in modern times, René Descartes has the most impact in philosophy. Everybody else who came after that, basically they rearranged and they came up with ideas that were not as effective as that which René Descartes had said. I would like to make the statement that in the middle of the 18th century, in the Baha'i revelation, Baha'u'llah is the only person who appears after René Descartes and makes a huge dent in philosophical assumptions that the philosophers were wrestling with and they had no answers to. And actually he provides answers to them. And yet no one has really challenged these the statements that have been made in order to see whether they are useless or useful. Now, one of the things that I would like to point out is that, and I give certain amount of credit, actually, I feel for the scholars and the learned for not doing so, because basically what happened was that they basically look at the Baha'i faith and they said, well, someone else appeared, and they added, and he added yet another religious ideology to the smorgasbord of all the other religions that we have. He's not saying anything new. He has just rehashed whatever that was said before. And based on that, they basically decided that they are going to sweep this under the carpet of indifference. However, the issue is that Baha'is, and in Baha'i faith in general, we do not treat religion as something extraordinary that has this magical root in it, where you're looking at either a virgin birth, or you're looking at someone who broke the moon into two pieces, and so on and so forth, or resurrected the dead in order to believe in them because that is what they did. Actually, Abdul Baha says, from a Baha'i point of view, we look at religion as a very utilitarian entity. Abdul Baha says that if religion is of no value and it is not, it is the cause of basically separation among the people, it is better for you to abandon that religion. So as a result, if philosophers were to understand that, they would see that this is completely different entity to deal with, and they would have taken it far more seriously. So tweak number 2. In the middle of mid 19th century, around 1875, Abdul Baha wrote a treaty that was distributed anonymously in the area, and basically it was referred to as Rasoli Madaniya. Actually, it is one of the two documents. One of them is Rasoli Madaniya, the other one Rasoli Siyasiya. So it's one of them is prescription for the society, and the other one is a prescription for politics. The one on politics has not been translated yet. It is available in the original language on the internet, as well as the Rasoli Madaniya. However, Rasoli Madaniya was translated into English as the secret of divine civilization. So it is mainly addressed to the rulers and the people of Persia, and it can be applied to any form of government that is under developmental reform. If you go to that particular time frame, you will see that this is the first document of its type in the Middle East. And actually, it ignited democratic movements throughout that region because it was read very widely. And people, given the fact that Abdul Baha did not identify himself and he referred to himself as a philosopher, basically, people looked at it as a philosophical writing and they reacted to it. And they did not really associate it with the Baha'i faith, which was not really looked upon in very positive terms. Persia was then an absolute monarchy. Nasir ad-Din Shah Qajar, who basically was the king for a very long time, basically was ruling the country. This is what he looked like. Religious leaders had an immense control over the Shah and the government. The status of the education was abysmal at that time. Ability to read and write was not considered necessary. The population was somewhere between 6.9 to 9.8 million people. Basically, education was restricted to the sons of the elite. Women was not to receive any education. And also the education was, there was a religious college that was called madrasa. And basically, if people wanted to learn more, they could have gone into that. However, few years of studying in Maktab, it really provided them with some basic reading and writing skills. Later on, Darul Funun, it was a European school that was formed somewhere around 1851, and by later on down the century, it had 1,100 graduates. However, I want you to realize that these 1,100 graduates basically represented 0.01% of this 6.9 to 9.8 million population. This graph is from the internet, and it looks at the population of Iran as a function of time. Abdu'l-Baha offers 3 requirements for establishing democracy in Persia. Number 1, ethical education of the children. Number 2, establishment of literacy for everyone. Please do not forget, this was what I just described up here was basically the environment in which he appeared and he wrote this document for. Everybody was illiterate. Creating informed citizens so that they would know what to require from their representatives. So how is this new approach? So let's read from Abdu'l-Baha what he's requiring. So basically, in terms of ethical education, I am not going to go through this. You are going to have access to basically this presentation, so you can read it for yourself. So basically, in essence, what he's saying is that if you consider children from early childhood, you will see that there is a need for education for these children. And if that is not done, basically, children are going to have basically a base approach in order to behave more like animals. And there is no way basically for the children to be left to themselves and to come up with moral entities. And then he says that, you know, in order to achieve that, it is just as the possibility very similar to achieving the philosopher's stone. It is very important. Education is essential. The second quotation, where Abdu'l-Baha is talking about a curriculum needs to be established where the basis of education is going to be the same for everybody. This is a missing factor in democracies today. Establishment of literacy for everyone. This is not a problem in the United States. However, when you go to other countries, this is definitely something that's going to be important for other countries. Have informed citizens so they know what they should require from their representatives. Have a robust understanding of good and bad. So I would like to take this one step further. If someone is going to ask me that, do we have informed citizens throughout the United States and they know exactly what they require from their representative? The answer is a mixture of yes and no. I am not sure if we can say 100% everybody knows exactly what it is that they want from their representative. So it is going to require some measure of participation and deeper interaction. And I am going to refer to what is it that's missing. So given the fact that I have critiqued democracy here, I would like to answer some of the questions. I'm going to go through these quickly because I have basically consumed the majority of my time here. So are citizens truly free to vote without coercion and intimidation? I'm going to give you a few thoughts for consideration and contemplation. Studies have shown that information is provided to voters not only influences who to vote for, but whether they vote or not. This is not based on what I'm saying. You can find papers on the internet. Just do a little bit of research and see if that is the case or not. Voters' attitude towards a candidate, their voting behavior can be influenced using carefully crafted survey questions. There is a bandwagon effect that we are dealing with. There is an underdog effect, that both of which could impact the behavior of the electorate. The use of emotional appeals in a campaign increases support for the candidate, decreases support for the challenger. This is a widely recognized practice and a common element of any campaign. Once again, I would like to repeat here, I am using these as examples for a philosophical conversation. I am not siding with any anybody. I am not accusing anybody. I'm just bringing up thoughts for consideration and contemplation. Last but not the least, we have this amazing tendency that when elections is taking place, people start forecasting who is going to be winning. This is terrible, because at the end of the day, if I am a voter, and I'm going to talk about Kamran, Kamran likes to be with the winners, not with the losers. If they're telling me that Mr. X or Mrs. Y is going to win, well, I'm going to say, I am going to go and vote for that, because at the end of the day, if I'm going to talk to Tom, Dick, and Harry, I would like to tell them that I voted for the winner. That is a tendency that we have as human beings, and we cannot change that. So isn't that better for us to be able to keep all of these without broadcasting it and wait until all the election results are out and then present it to people, allow people to do what they want to do without? And I put all of these under coercion and intimidation. These are very soft forms of coercion and intimidation. However, I think it is interesting for people to consider them and reach their own conclusion. Now, the landscape of democracy is covered with landmines of infomercials. What do I mean by that? What is information and how it is different from knowledge? Basically, we have raw data. After it goes through evaluation, it turns into information. After it goes through contemplation, it turns into knowledge. And you merge that with experience and intuition, it turns into wisdom. So what does that mean? Citizens at the electorate level reacting based on these factors. So is this actionable or not? Observation, what we see on TV, hear on radio, read on newspaper, on social media, etc. Is this actionable? No, it is not. Information, if and when some basic evaluation done by these observations, these are the commentaries that we hear, either on podcasts, television, radio, we read in the newspaper. Is this actionable? No. Knowledge, when we study the information and contemplate on its implication, is this actionable? Yes. Wisdom, when we combine deep knowledge with vast experience and intuition, is this actionable? Yes. How do you think the great majority of the electorate behave? We all follow the path of least resistance, spending the least amount of energy. I come from a chemistry background. In chemistry, everything in nature wants to be at the lowest level of Gibbs free energy. So that means you want to do the least amount of work in order to get to where it makes you stable. So is it really okay for people to go and do a lot of study in order to come up with knowledge, in order to vote for tens of people throughout the year because all the work that they want to do? Well, I guess not. Will Kamran do it? I guess not. I've got better things to do than going and studying things. So as a result, what do? I allow observation and information to basically drive my behavior, and emotion is going to take over because it's not rational fully, because it has not been digested rationally. So as a result, my emotion is going to run it. So as a result, we are going to have a bunch of elections who are going to be based on not rationality, but being emotional. So what do we do about this? How do we obtain knowledge? It seems Abdul Baha came up with a very simple answer to that. Abdul Baha says that there are 4 kinds of proofs available to a human being. One of them is based on sense perception, that which you touch, see, hear, or whatever else. Another one has to do with the faculty of reason. Another one has to do with your gut feeling. And the last one has to do with that which you believe, or these are the religious views and religious opinions and learnings that you have. Then he goes on to look at each one of them. And let me tell you beforehand, he says none of them are trustworthy. And he gives reasons for that. Criterion of senses, you cannot trust that. Why? He says you're sitting in a in a boat and you're passing by objects that are stationary. However, as far as you're concerned, you are stationary and that object is moving. You go into the desert. From a distance, you see a mirage and you think it's a body of water. You look at the sky. You see the moon is moving. You see the sun is moving. So as a result, that is your first assumption, is that that is where the moving is taking place. But it's the earth that's rotating around itself. So you cannot trust that which you see. So don't trust what you see on TV. Don't trust what you read in the newspaper. Don't trust what you hear in the podcast, because it is sense perception only. The second one, can we trust the criterion of intellect? Again, he says no. He says if that was a correct criterion that you can rely on, then philosophers of the West would have agreed philosophers of the East. Persian philosophers would have been in agreement with the Greek philosophers, with the Roman philosophers, with the Indian philosophers, and nobody would have said something that would disagree with the other. So you cannot really rely on that. The traditional or scriptural, whatever you understand out of your holy book, you're a Muslim, you're a Christian, you're a Hindu, that which you understand to be your religious learning, can you trust in that? He says no, because you have understood that by the criterion of your reason. That's number one. Or you have understood that because you were born into a family that came from that background and you never studied it. And you just know it because it is something traditionally yours and you have no understanding of it. So as a result, this cannot be relied upon. The gut feeling or the criteria of inspiration, can you trust that? Again, he says, no, you cannot trust that because you don't know if it is the outcome of your selfish desire or it is a true inspiration. Then somebody basically raises their hand and they say, well, what am I going to do? What are you saying? He says, yes, there is a solution to that. If you can come up with a solution where it is sensible, it is reasonable, it is in agreement with that which your belief system is telling you, and you have a good gut feeling about it, then you can rely on it. Now, you might come back to me and say, well, not every situation is going to require all four of these criteria. And that is a true statement. In science, we rely only on two criteria. It's sense perception and reason. That is the scientific criteria. So for science, that is what we rely on. If you're going to make a moral judgment, then you need to rely on the other two. What your book says, what your gut feeling is, and then is it reasonable or not? Is it sensible or not? So depending on where we come from, we tend to favor one of these criteria. So the masses of the religious people in the United States, what do you think their criteria of judgment is? Whatever they hear from the pulpit of the church, which comes from whatever they think the book says. What do you think someone who is from a materialist school of thought, what do they think? They think that which the materialist philosophers have taught. What do you think someone who is coming from either a Democratic or a Republican or whatever else criteria come from? Whatever that particular school of thought is teaching them. And according to Abdu'l-Baha, relying on that particular criteria is not adequate to make the judgment. So what is Abdu'l-Baha's purpose in suggesting this model? He is advocating a scientific approach. He says every individual should use the sense perception, incorporate that which they have experienced by sense perception, by reason, and this is a scientific, gives it a scientific dimension. And this is what scientific dimension, scientific criteria is. However, wait a minute, Abdullah is not just suggesting that. Actually, he makes it even more, much harder and much more robust, because he is giving that an ethical dimension as well. Because now he's, in addition to that, he's putting a traditional and a scriptural authority as well as the gut feeling into that. And in conclusion, I would like to read what Abdul Baha says, which I think is very valuable here. He says, the man of science is perceiving and endowed with vision, whereas he who is ignorant and neglectful of this development is blind. The investigating mind is attentive, alive. Callous and indifferent mind is deaf and dead. A scientific man is true index and representative of humanity for true process of inductive reasoning and research. He is informed of all that appertains to humanity, its status, conditions, happenings, and he studies the human body politics, understands social problems, and weaves the web and texture of civilization. So one point that I would like to make about this is that this model actually applies to a person who has basic primary school education and someone who is a professor at a university at the postdoctoral level. You might ask why. A person who has not too much education, they still have a sense perception. They have their own sense of reason. They have their own beliefs, and they have their own gut feelings. They can make what Abdullah says, use that which is available to you in order to make the best judgment that you could possibly make, rather than relying on just one of these criteria. Regarding how to be worthy elected officials. At the end of the day, I'm going to, statement of fact is that the elected officials come from among the citizens of the society. So if you're going to solve that problem, we need to solve the problems of the citizens of the society. Let's make the citizens stronger, so those who come from among the citizens are going to be strong representatives. Regrettably, we educate our doctors, engineers, lawyers, etc. In fact, doctors have to go through hoops in order to be able to be qualified to serve in one state. And as they move from one state to another state, they have to go and become recertified in order to be able to operate in that state. Yet, our politicians basically, they come into their office without any of those. If we want to hire a head of a corporation, they have to go through 3-4 days of interviews. They need to show what it is that they have done and what it is that they can do. Do they understand what the field that they are getting into? However, are we doing that with our representatives that go into politics? I am not criticizing the politicians. I'm criticizing the process that we as human beings have established in order to make this possible. So basically, Abdullah highlights the importance of education one more time. Since we have limited amount of time here, I'm just going to go through these very, very fast. Baha'u'llah says, man is a supreme talisman. Lack of proper education deprived him of that which he inherently possesses. So as a result, we need to bring education into our society. And I'm talking about ethical education, because that's the one that's missing, not the scientific education. Education is of three kinds: spiritual, human, and material. And it is the spiritual that we're talking about here. That is extremely important. That needs to be injected into the society in order to make the politics better. Once this is achieved, we can expect worthy officials to proceed from citizens, educated as such. What is one's true purpose to be an elected representative? And basically, what distinguishes a human being from an animal is having a choice. So basically, to a human being, there are two choices. On one hand, we submit to our passions. On the other hand, we have a choice of ascending above our passions and to become better people in order to be able to operate at an integrated level of a society. The question is, which choice is the most suitable and for a healthy and a vibrant society? Baha'u'llah associates the behavior of those who choose to serve their own base. And he says the fact that you see some people exhibit delight in worldly power and see themselves in earthly eminence is due to their heedlessness. One of the signs of the maturity of humanity is that when they offer humanity kingship, and that people refuse to take that. Actually, he gives us a criteria by which we can make a judgment whether we have reached that level of maturity or not. What inspires an elected representative to trust the electorate? Addressing the Queen of England, Baha'u'llah states that we have heard that thou hast entrusted the reins of the council into the hands of the representatives of the people. Thou indeed hast done well. And then he goes on to describe that it behoveth the representatives to be such and such and regard themselves as the representatives of all that dwell on earth. Baha'u'llah describes some of the characteristics of the elected representatives of the people, that what they need to do. They need to pay attention to that which profits mankind. And also, they need to, one of the fundamental characteristics that's going to be a requirement is their ability to be able to make a distinction, as I mentioned before, between good and bad and right and wrong. When they understand what is the requirement for achieving and being able to make a judgment about right and wrong, that is the moment, that is the aha moment where they are going to have an epiphany and they can move out of their shell. And actually, basically, the jewel is going to show itself. Then he wants us to cling to the hem of virtue, trustworthiness, and piety in order to be a good representative. So basically, once again, ability to make a choice, to understand the difference between good and bad and right and wrong. This is when the representative would obtain the true respect. Otherwise, acknowledgement of the excellence of honor does not really make a man honorable. The attainment of any subject is conditioned upon knowledge, volition, and action. The people really need to take that. So I would like to finish this presentation by these two statements. One of them is a statement of Abdul Baha about American democracy. He praises this democracy as the first nation who established the foundation of international agreements. And he sees a very bright future for the United States in order to take humanity to the next stage, which is the formation of a world government and establishment of democracy throughout the whole world. And then he actually has offered a prayer for America. And he's asking for the confirmation of this revered nation to appraise the standard of the unity of humanity and the starting point and the establisher of the most great peace. I want to thank you very much for allowing me to spend the time with you and go through this presentation. And please accept my apologies to those who set up this program. I took more time than what was allotted to me. So there is only 10 minutes remaining here to answer some questions. However, in the beginning of this presentation, I have my email address, and everyone is welcome to send me an email. I will be very happy to answer any questions you might have. But if there are any questions that you have, I will be very happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for all of this. As you've made I believe, a very coherent presentation. People can, in YouTube, going to the link, or on Facebook, rewind and actually watch these parts and learn more from the points. And really, you've asked a lot of frequently asked questions as well, and answered them. So there are questions about the email address. We welcome you to go to the video and pull up the address. What else? We want to know about questions that people may have in the audience before we close out. So if there are questions, I would appreciate you raising your hand here on Zoom, of course, on Facebook and YouTube. We appreciate your comments. Sandra has a question. She raised her hand, and I'm going to Okay, Sandra, can you unmute, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. This was really fascinating. And I enjoyed the way you've built it up from the beginnings, because it really helps us to see what were the ideals versus the actual. So my question is about the way we're seeing things operate at the moment, maybe not necessarily in America, but I'm in the United Kingdom, and we have had a series of quite embarrassing occurrences happen in the government of recent months. So it seems to me that people are going into politics, and again, no criticism meant, but for personal rather than altruistic reasons. And also that the way in which the constitutional democracy is set up, so with a party political system, it seems that it's more about getting into power and not being able to do anything that sustains, because when a party's in opposition, all they do is seem to criticize, and when a party's in power, all they seem to do is struggle to get anything passed through. So we Baha'is are asked not to get involved in the political process. So how do we support an education for people that, I know the RU system and all of that, the RU books and junior youth and children's classes, but how do we change something now in terms of, as an ordinary person, in terms of making a difference when it comes to the democracy, which we're charged by Baha'u'llah to obey. We're asked to obey the rules of the government, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. Sorry, that's a lot of questions, but
yeah, actually, this is a very loaded question. It is a very good question, but I would like to answer it as follows. The answer to this actually resides in the fact that Baha'is have been specifically told and requested not to participate in the partisan politics of the day. That does not prevent us from actually making statements and sharing with the population in regards to what are the things that should be done. However, please understand that there is a misunderstanding in regards to the role of religion and how people view religion. And we Baha'is as a religious group are looked down upon as a group that does not really have any solutions to offer. And if there are any solutions to be offered, it is simply a rehashing of that which other religions have already mentioned. So as a result, they are going to be just sweeping us under the carpet of indifference. This is the fundamental reason, in my opinion, that Shoghi Effendi has identified these twin processes of the birth and death in his writings, where he says that there are these two processes, like the changes in the season that are taking place, the same way that an old tree dies and a new one from its own seed grows. The same thing is going to be happening here. If people are not really, the political institutions and other people are not really going to be paying too much attention to the Baha'is, as a result, it is much better for Baha'is to focus on that which we believe is going to be helpful in the formation of a new model and the new world order, and allow the existing establishment to do what it does. Now, we can give our recommendation, our books are available, our scholars are making their statements, and it is always it is available to people to read about them and basically react to them. For example, look at the peace statement that was released by the Universal House of Justice in 1980s. The only thing out of that statement that was captured by the population at large and the various government was the idea of world order. You don't see anything else that they talk about, and they took the terminology of world order out of that, and they are using it with negative connotations, left and right. So as a result, whatever we say, the existing establishment most probably is not going to be reacting to. And we should not really get upset, because that is the way it is. But we are in the process of building the same way that as an old tree is going to be shivering and passing away, the new shoot is growing from underneath the snow. So when the snow melts, you see the new shoot growing, and the new tree is going to be establishing itself. I hope I answered your question.
I think it's a tough one. It's a question I've been struggling with, but thank you. I think you're right. It is only by establishing the new world order that we will have an answer, a solution to the issue. Thank you very much.
But that should not take away from the fact that we should not just remain indifferent. Whenever we need to speak without getting participate in the politics, I think we have a lot to offer. We should offer good words to people, so hopefully they can use that in the existing system and make life easier for humanity. Other than that, you're going to look at it from a negative point of view. This avalanche has started coming down, and the ball of snow is going to get larger and larger, and it's going to destroy anything that is going to be on its path. So we need to speak, and we need to be able to give the words of Baha'u'llah to humanity. So hopefully they can use it in their own way in order to make the process less painful.
Thank you so much for asking these important questions. Now, it is about time for us to be closing out, but given that we did go a little longer, I have a question. If anyone else has anything, I don't see a hand raised. We've discussed that the email, you can access it. I've included, sorry about that. I've included the video link on this Zoom for YouTube and for the Facebook. Of course, those watching on YouTube or Facebook, they're already there. But for us on the Zoom, I've included the link so you can find earlier in the video the email. That being said, there seems to be no other questions. So I think it's a good place for us to close out for today. And of course, there's plenty of guidance for everyone that's attended today from, of course, the central figures, but also from the Universal House of Justice and just publicly published documents as to how the involvement of politics, Baha'is are to avoid many of the things that involve dealing with a society, but how we can productively be involved. And there's a lot of ways to be productively involved in our society, and even talking with our representative of our government to ask them to do things that are productive for our society and our community. So there's a lot of positive, productive ways we can contribute to our society. We're just here to help enkindle the love of unity, and we're not here to bring about dissension and conflict, which inevitably comes when you support one position, and that position is antagonistic to every other. So it's important to remember that we're trying to bring together a society, and we're not trying to tear it apart to get one thing passed, to get one thing successfully made into law, for example. That being said, one important place we want you to look at for just following up with this is www.clearwaterbaha'is.org. We have some other videos as well from our speaker today that we would love you to look at, because Kamran Hakim has been a speaker on other topics in the past, and we would love you to watch those, as well as the other beautiful speakers that we've had come and go over the course of the past 2 years or so. So that being said, Mr. Kamran Hakim, if we could ask, is there anything else that is desired before we close out that you want to discuss?
Oh, there was one message that I just received, and somebody had asked regarding the relationship between capitalism and democracy. We should not really, some people mix the two concepts together. Capitalism is a system, is an economic system. Democracy is a political system. Well, there are areas of convergence between the two, but nevertheless, they are two different concepts, and each one is its own right.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And with this being said, we thank you all for joining today, and we wish you a beautiful Sunday. And until next week, we hope you reflect on this and ask your questions for Kamran. He'd love to address them. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.